I have the pleasure of introducing my boss, mentor, spiritual advisor, Jeremy Travis, the president of John Jay College, who will tell you about John Roman, our next speaker. President Travis.
Jeff, I'm still working on this spiritual advisor thing. I don't know quite what that means, but I think it's a compliment. So hello, everybody. So give me a room check. How's the conference so far? Good. Okay. So I have a very short assignment, which is to introduce John Roman. Not because it doesn't take much time to introduce him, but I can't take much more time from your program. But I just want to say how fortunate you are. Is Marion still here? So have been in the presence of Marion Wright Edelman, who's one of the great champions for young people in our nation, and has been doing this work for many years with great skill, great effectiveness, and it's wonderful that she considers John Jay one of her stops on her road as she tries to raise national consciousness. One of the great moments in my personal life was giving Marion the John Jay Medal. She got the Justice Award 2 years ago. I put it over her head, but the person who introduced her was Harry Belafonte. Wow. I mean, how much better does it get than that? So you're lucky to have Marion be here. I also want to acknowledge that she just left the room, but we have a great public servant, Kathleen Rice, who is here. Vinnie Schiraldi is here. Over here, another great advocate for young people. We're very fortunate to have great public servants here. I know there are others in the room as well. So the work that's being done in this room ultimately has to be transformed into public policy. So it's all good for all of us to get together and sort of pat ourselves on the back and feel confident that we're speaking the truth to each other, but ultimately this has to translate. So the sense I want to give to you, my personal sense, is that there's some unstoppable momentum in New York, which is not a call for complacency or self-congratulation. Rather, it's a call for bringing this one over the goal line. We're almost there in some big ways. So here's what I see in the environment. We have, first and foremost, a political environment that's conducive to change. We now have 3 governors who have supported juvenile justice reform: Spitzer, Patterson, and now Cuomo. We have Mayor Bloomberg, who has been a strong advocate for young people, and incoming Mayor de Blasio, who will keep that flame alive. So the political environment is very good. I just spoke to somebody at the City Council. There's a good movement on the City Council. We have some sense that the legislature is about to do something, but we need to sort of bring this one over the goal line. So I hope that one of the outcomes of the day today is to really talk politics and talk strategy as to what's needed on the raise to age legislation. The backdrop to all of this is a big change in terms of juvenile detention and juvenile placement in New York State. Again, support from the governors, very good support from Gladys Carrion, who has really helped, is really a pioneer here. I'd like to think that the task force that Governor Patterson asked me to chair, that report helped add to this momentum. And the numbers, Jeff gave me the numbers once, but the numbers are truly impressive in terms of the number of young people now being kept close to home under the language of that initiative is truly impressive. So we have a good story to tell, but we have still some more work to do. We are benefited in this work by the presence and support of the Pinkerton Foundation. So I know that you've heard from Rick Smith and his colleague Julie Peterson already today, but we would not be here today, and the college is very grateful for the support that we've received, and our young people, our students have received, and our faculty have received from the Pinkerton Foundation. So I need to ask you one more time just to thank Rick and his board and the foundation for their support. And we're also in the presence of another major foundation in this field. If you don't know the Tao Foundation, you should get to know their story. I'm going to shamelessly plug their work. Juvenile justice reform in Connecticut. Emily Tao Jackson is here. Emily's somewhere over here. Where is she? Oh, Emily's over there. And her colleague, Diane Serpina, is here. I saw her. So the Connecticut story is the story that we hold out to ourselves as the example that this can be done. It took over 10 years for them to do this work. We're in the final year or two of what has to be done in New York. So please get a copy of this from Emily or Diane. See the work they've done and understand the importance of philanthropic support for this work, that foundations can make an enormous difference. And that's why we're grateful to Pinkerton. So that's my commercial announcement. So, John Roman. So John and I spent 4 in my life transformative years at the Urban Institute, leaving NIJ, coming to a think tank, doing research, publishing, making trouble, trying to sort of stir the pot a little bit on issues of prisoner reentry. And that allowed me to come into contact with Jeff Butts, but for these purposes, with John Roman. So John has carved out his own sort of scholarly field that is now yielding great benefit. John is known in our world as one of the sort of premier academics who thinks about cost-benefit analysis. So at a time when evidence-based is the watchword of the day, and you have to be able to prove your value, be able to do it in a way that shows policymakers that this investment produces this returns and it saves money, you need this guy, and people like him. So John is really almost single-handedly carved out that portfolio. Coming right behind that, John is one of the national experts on the new phenomenon of social impact bonds, which is sort of a modern version, a business-like version of cost-benefit. Is that fair to say that? It's absolutely. So it's a way of saying to the business community, a community that's never been at the table, if you invest in the work that these programs do, and we have good rigorous research that shows that there's a value to that investment, and we can show that that produces public sector savings, you should be willing to invest in those programs because the public sector savings can go into your pocket, shared with the taxpayers. So this idea, this way of thinking is very important to the work that's being done by the people in this room. So you're very fortunate to have John as your speaker, and I only wish I could stay here, but I gotta go do something else. But thanks all for coming.
So before you walk out the door, I just want to say I had a birthday yesterday, and birthday is the day you sort of take stock of where you stand in the universe, and getting that introduction from President Travis, really, that's pretty great, right? So, and I want to thank Jeff and his colleagues here for inviting me and having me come up. Some of you are so far away. Hi. So there's great energy in this room this morning, and so hopefully my discussion of the dismal science of economics and budgets won't dampen that enthusiasm. Mark talked about the Connecticut experience, and that's really where our story starts. Jeff Butts and I did some research in Connecticut back, was that 7 or 8 years ago? And what happened in Connecticut was there was some momentum around this raise the age, and the fiscal agency in Connecticut put out a note that basically said that moving juveniles from the adult system to the juvenile system would cost an enormous amount of money. And we got asked to do sort of a more in-depth, intensive study to try and figure out if that was right or not. But what they've done there is they've only focused on the cost side. So we wanted to focus on the whole picture. So I think we're going to put up a slide here in a second that will show the paper that we're working on. And so basically what this is, this very brief talk that is now probably half through, is a commercial for this, which is a report that we should have out next month. It's going to talk about the costs and benefits of raising the age of juvenile jurisdiction. And I just sort of wanted to walk you through really quickly the logic of our approach, because I think it's important to understand, because in the policy debate, the budget numbers really matter, and the fiscal impact matters, but I want to think more broadly than that, go beyond that, and think about what this means much more holistically. So one thing we have to consider here is we have to consider there's a savings to the adult system by moving juveniles out. And there's a savings in a bunch of different ways. It's not just that the juveniles aren't there anymore. It's that in the adult system, people stay a lot longer than they stay in the juvenile system. So while everybody agrees that the costs of a day in the juvenile system are much greater than the cost of a day in the adult system, people are in the adult system a lot longer, so the total cost can sort of outweigh the difference in the daily cost. The other thing is that adult systems are really inefficient places to house juveniles. You have to do all the same things in the adult system that you have to do in the juvenile system. You know, 16, 17-year-olds need to be in school, they need therapies, whatever therapeutic processes you have in place to serve them. And if you have a juvenile system that is sort of aligned to do all of those things, it's much more efficient than if you sort of carve out juveniles as a special needs population in the adult system and try and build things in facilities that really are about behavior management and really not about anything therapeutic whatsoever. So when somebody says, you know, the juvenile system is more expensive than the adult system, there's a really big but that comes after that, and we want to figure out how expensive that is. The other thing to note is that the juvenile system is more the adult system is more dangerous for youth than the juvenile system is for youth. And there are harms associated with being victimized while you are in custody that you also have to account for in this analysis. And we wanted, sorry, I lost my place. I don't usually do this, but I thought today I'd try something new. The other really important thing to think about is the outcomes of being in one system versus the other. So a juvenile in the juvenile system is, you know, the evidence isn't overwhelming. I think it's pretty convincing that juveniles in the juvenile system have better life course outcomes than they would have if they had been in the adult system instead. And so what that means is less recidivism, so it means less use of juvenile facilities in the short term. In the long term, it can mean all sorts of big cost savings, like less attachment to social welfare programs, and additional costs like better educational attainment. Now, that's a point I really want to hit on, because one of the mistakes that I think we make in thinking about all of this stuff is we want to reduce costs, and that's our priority, and that's the thing we think a lot about. But when we're talking about youth, in many ways that doesn't make an enormous amount of sense. If we had an anti-dropout program and we got kids to stay in school and they got more school and it cost us more money to educate them, I don't think anybody would argue that that was a bad thing, that cost is something that you wouldn't want to experience. And I think the same should be true in the juvenile justice system when we think about especially programs with a therapeutic orientation that help kids get off this track of criminal offending and back onto a more pro-social path. So the costs and the benefits aren't just numbers, they're not just something that exists in a budget. There are also costs and benefits that go way beyond what happens within a budget, within the city's budget, within the state's budget. So if you get a kid into the appropriate therapy, you match his needs to his to the therapy that you provide to him, and you get this kid on a better path, and this kid's outside the subway, and you're coming out and it's dark, and the kid, you know, the kid's getting mental health treatment now, so he's stable, and instead of assaulting you to take your wallet to get money to buy drugs to self-medicate, he just lets you pass and you're not victimized. So you go to work the next day, you don't go to the hospital, you don't experience the stress and the trauma of a victimization. You experience an enormous amount of benefit as a person because we've helped this person rather than just incarcerated them. Now, you wouldn't have been victimized if they'd been incarcerated either, right? But this, it's much, you know, you have all these long-term benefits from keeping kids out of the adult corrections and in the community and giving them therapies that address their needs and put them on a better path. So we think that when you're thinking about all of the costs and benefits associated with this really important question of raising the age, you have to think about it holistically, and you have to think about it in terms of costs and benefits that exist outside of budgets. I always say, it says on the patrol corps to protect and to serve. It does not say to preserve scarce criminal justice system resources, right? So when we think about public safety, when we think about what the purpose is of law enforcement, we have to think beyond just what's in the budget and think about what are the real, actual, monetizable, quantifiable impacts of changing the behavior of a youth who comes into contact with law enforcement. So I'll wrap up there. Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak with you today.
So I'm Richard Aborn. I am president of the Citizens Crime Commission. I am delighted to be here, but what makes me much more delighted is to see all of you here. Jeremy said there's an enormous amount of energy in this room. I think that's exactly right. This campaign is going to take a lot of energy, but we have mounted lots of campaigns in the past that took a lot of energy, and we've delivered them home. Those have been to the benefit of our communities. Hi, Angelo. Welcome. If we were on Broadway, I was vamping until you arrived. But now that you're here, we'll get going. So I doubt, maybe I should do a snap poll. Anybody here who's willing to raise their hand and say they're against raising the age?
Do we have to convince people that this is a good thing to do? Okay. Well, this is certainly not an NRA convention, I'll tell you that, by any means. All right, so then maybe what we ought to do is get into some of the detail, the nitty-gritty, the nuance of how to get this done. Because I think Jeremy's right. I think we are at a critical moment in the history of the criminal justice system in our state and in our city, and I think this is the year where we could get something done. I don't think this needs to be a multi-year project. And I think if we stay together, we coalesce around some ideas, which is happening, which is great, we will make some real progress. So let me start out by not reading the bios of the panelists, but by introducing them. You have their bios. Melanie Hartzog is the New York head of the Children's Defense Fund. CDF is a fantastic organization. They've been doing great work for a long, long time across the country, and I'm absolutely thrilled that they are engaged in this struggle. They are a very important voice on a lot of issues. Jennifer March runs the Citizens Committee for Children, likewise a very strong advocacy group, very effective, very sharp, understands both the political side of things and the policy side. And Angelo, you and I have not worked together before, but welcome to this. Angelo is now the campaign manager for the Juvenile Justice Project at the Correctional Association. While I may not know Angelo, I certainly do know CA, and I have great respect and admiration for their work. They are a very important voice, not just on this issue, but on the whole range of correctional issues. And as we all know, those are critical issues. So thank you all for agreeing to do this. So we're going to go for about 20, 25 minutes, maybe a little less, and then we're going to turn to you, because I think where this is the most important is to have a bit of a Q&A with the audience. When Jeffrey asked me to do this, he gave me a sort of an odd instruction, which was less meet the press and more Fox. You guys ready? Having been skewered on Fox far too many times, I know what that's like. So I'll be somewhere in between, but if I interrupt, it's for the good of the audience. So Angelo, maybe we ought to start with you. John just talked about the benefits, the costs and the actual benefits, right, both from decreased incarceration rates, more effective interventions with juveniles, steering kids away from the path of criminal justice, and de-victimization, fewer victims out there. I wonder if you'd want to talk a little bit about what you see as some of the obstacles out there to passing this legislation.
Right. I mean, I think the clear obstacles, when you have the discussion about raising the age, the first thing you hear is usually raising the age for who? So there's always a discussion of violent youth versus non-violent youth. So that's one of the biggest obstacles. The other obstacle I think you often hear is the cost. It's going to cost too much money to raise the age. And the response to both of those questions for me would be this. In regards to cost, oftentimes folks are thinking it costs about 70,000 years in New York State to incarcerate an adult.
Angelo, sorry, you have to get really close to the mic.
I'm sorry. It costs about $70,000 in New York State to incarcerate an adult or someone in the adult system. It costs about $270,000 to incarcerate a youth in a youth detention facility. So that's where you see the cost. Often what folks are thinking is we're just shifting youth from the adult system, the 16 and 17-year-olds, to the youth facilities, and that isn't the case. What we often say is alternatives to incarceration, community-based alternatives, are much more cost-efficient than moving youth from the adult system to the youth detention centers. So that alleviates some of the cost question. In regards to youth who commit violent crimes, what we often say is, the research shows that if a youth commits a violent offense and then is put in the system, he's going to come out and recidivate at higher rates. Even when you have youth who commit misdemeanors and they come in contact with the system, chances are they come out of the system and increase in violent behavior. So taking youth, 16 and 17-year-olds, out of the adult facility can also reduce costs, but also reduce violent offenses. And that's exactly what we're trying to do. I think
Let me jump for a second.
Yes.
No, I'm going to come right back to you.
Yes.
I'm going to come right back to you. This is quasi-Fox. So one of the keys to passing legislation is, it's like litigation. It's to be able to tell a story. And you need to be able to tell a story in a clear, concise, and compelling way. Sort of the 3 C's of advocacy. You've got a group of advocates in here. We want to make every single person in here an ambassador for Raise the Age. So to the extent that you and the other panelists can give us succinct facts which people can repeat and say, here's the cost issue, here's the recidivism issue, here are the benefits. I think that's really useful. So I'd ask you to weave some of that, everybody, into whatever remarks you make. You want to continue?
Just to say one thing, and I think the numbers are tremendously important. And you've heard today from most of the presentations, the numbers. There's a tremendous amount of 16 and 17-year-olds who come in contact with the system, the number of youth who find themselves in adult jails and facilities. But one of the things that's often missing from this conversation, and groups like Her Story can really speak to this, is the individual stories of each of those youth. Oftentimes I tell folks, there's about 40 to 50,000 reasons to raise the age, and that's each of the individuals, young folks who come in contact with the system. It's not going to tell you those numbers that we often want to hear, but those stories are just as compelling. In Her Story's book, they speak about a young girl named Denise Irby who was incarcerated in an adult facility and gave birth while she was in shackles. Right? So these are some of the stories you hear of youth who come in contact with the system. And what we often forget is not only are these youth tremendously impacted, but these youth's families are tremendously impacted. Then the community is tremendously impacted, right? So the collateral consequences are quite severe.
That's terrific. Jennifer, let me turn to you next. So Angelo talked about 40 to 50,000 kids, and you know this data. Everybody keep in mind, this is not a New York City effort, this is a New York State effort. So you gotta be very careful when you hear these numbers to understand, particularly think about costs, whether they're city numbers or state numbers. Can you break down the 40 to 50,000 that Angelo talked about? And if you don't know, it's fine. And talk about what the divisions are and what the splits are between misdemeanors and felonies.
I think it's about 50,000 arrests a year. About 30,000 of them are misdemeanor, are from New York City. About 75% of that 50,000 are misdemeanors, nonviolent offenses.
That's exactly right. And these are 16 and 17-year-olds that we're talking about. These are not 18 or 15-year-olds. So let's say we were to carve out those 16 and 17-year-olds. There's been a lot of thought given to how to handle that. What do you mean? These are still going to be cases. These kids are still going to either get arrested or summoned, or there's going to be some intervention with the police. What are your thoughts about what should happen with those kids afterwards? It's different from what's currently happening. What courts should they go to? How should we handle, etc.?
I run a child advocacy organization. So, in my view, we would not treat violent crime any non-violent crime, and that all 16 and 17-year-olds would be acknowledged as children. My preference would be for a presumptive application of the Family Court Act. At some courthouse, it doesn't have to be the family court, maybe criminal court, maybe a special court. And the key there is that we acknowledge that all children, 16 and 17-year-olds, irrespective of the type of crime they commit, are still at the same developmental stage. Teenagers, many of you in the room have them, do stupid, impulsive things sometimes, but because they're young, they have a greater opportunity to actually grow and learn from their mistakes, and it's our obligation, I think, to structure a system that permits them to do that and ensures that even among those that need to be incarcerated, that it's structured in a manner that allows them to rehabilitate and be able to seek an education, have gainful employment, if needed, be in public housing, and have a full life.
Okay, that's terrific. You said something rather quickly, but I want to focus on it for a second, which is you would argue for a presumption, which is a legal presumption, of the application of the Family Court Act, and then you quickly said, well, not the building. Let's dig into that a little bit, because as you start to sink yourselves into this issue, you'll hear that there's a pretty vigorous discussion about which law should apply. Is it the Family Court Act, or is it the New York State Penal Law? And where should that application take place? Should it be in the family courthouse, or should it be in whatever structure, whatever court, depending on where you are, is holding the penal law application? So is this a conversation about bricks, which building, or is it a conversation about which law?
I think it's about which law, and then I'll let my colleagues here answer. I mean, I have nothing against the family court. I have incredible colleagues that do impeccable work in the area of juvenile justice, child welfare, also child support. I think the challenge really is that we all know that the current family court system in the state of New York is incredibly overburdened and under-resourced. So I don't want to actually layer on an already overburdened system a large population of children that they need to well serve. So my preference really would be to look at how you apply the law in a different courthouse.
Melanie, let me jump off on that a little bit and ask you this question, and again, it's for the advocates in the room, which is, we all talk about 16 and 17-year-olds, but as you know, the New York State Legislature some 50 or 60 years ago looked at this issue and essentially said, let's study it for a year or two and make a decision. We're now many years down the road. What's different about 16 or 17-year-olds? Why 16 or 17-year-olds should be treated differently than, say, 18, 19, or 20, or fully adult criminals?
Pregnant lady has to mosey up to the microphone to get comfortable. You know, I think, look, when we started this work, and CEF comes to this work as part of the Raise the Age New York campaign, that is a statewide group who is organized around this. Many of our partners are here in the room today. And, you know, you start to parcel this apart, and I think part of what I've been hearing today, and I hope that we continue to talk about this, is, you know, why is it 16 and 17-year-olds? And what about 18 and 19-year-olds? And why are we making these arbitrary decisions based on a certain age when all of the research tells us that, in fact, the brain is not fully developed until 25? And I think that, you know, why are 13-year-olds treated as adults automatically? I mean, so here it is, I feel like as a campaign, we're sitting here saying, yeah, you know, this is all decisions that were made that are somewhat arbitrary around numbers when all the research tells us otherwise. And so the push